I'm really asking for more information about Kant. I don't know a great deal about Kant, and I found your paper very, very informative and thought-provoking. But I have a simple question. As I understand the resolution of the antinomy, it depends upon, basically the rational requirements of morality.
Well,
if I can put it that way.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And I'm wondering how far that will justify, or that will solve the antinomy with regard to teleological principles as one finds them or seems to find them in the actual world. Namely, how it would extend beyond rational creatures to other sorts of living things.
Yeah, no, excellent question. Again, when one has only a few minutes to talk about so many things, one has to leave all sorts of things out, and this is a prime example of that. So I think Carl actually alluded to this in his paper yesterday too. The thing about the third critique is that it seems very strange. You've got a first half about aesthetics and a second half about, well, natural teleology, which seems to be about organisms. But then Kant, in the introductions and then throughout, he seems to have some more grandiose ambitions that this is all supposed to hang together in a single system, right? And so why would you think that talking about, worms and snails and things like that, what does that have to do with, all of nature? And how would that unify Kant's entire critical system? And here I think that it's better to think of organisms as the starting point, which is it's in the experience of organisms that you discover some perplexing features. And then once you're attuned to this feature in the world, then you need to think of, reason is actually what leads you to think about, okay, there's this special kind of conditioning relationship in organisms that, hadn't been in view earlier, because we had a very simple kind of conditioning relationship in mechanistic causality. With organisms, we have a more complex kind of conditioning relation with the whole depending on the parts at the same time that the parts depend on the whole and the parts depend on each other. And so there's a sense in which you might think reason says, oh my goodness, there's this complex conditioning relationship. Well, reason is interested in conditions, right? That's how he understands reason, is the faculty that searches for conditions for anything conditioned. Well, when he discovers organisms and he says, well, are there any conditions for this kind of complex conditioning relationship? And in particular, why do such organisms exist? What is the condition of their existence? And that leads him to look for further conditions. And so, so in biology, in effect, in part what you're doing is looking for what are the dependencies within, say, an ecosystem, right? What causally depends on what? And his position is that we can never find anything unconditioned in nature, right? Every ecosystem is linked with every other, and it expands further and further. But reason is never satisfied until it finds the unconditioned. And so what that means is that you're driven to look at all the parts of nature as being in this large conditioning relationship with everything else. And so it turns out that once you start thinking about organisms, then you're led to thinking about nature as a whole, as a system of ends. That's a phrase that he uses a few times. And so it turns out that you're looking for a system of empirical laws that would be both mechanistic and teleological, and then you've got the sort of moral purpose that allows you to have a kind of hierarchical relationship even within those, because you're stuck with the mechanical laws, and then you've got some end to nature as a system of ends. So he thinks that this whole system of nature requires a supersensible principle, otherwise all of it doesn't make sense. Does that start to address the question?
Would it be fair to say that when you think about the systematicity of nature, you realize that the teleology that's exemplified by the bodies of rational creatures could not exist were it not for conditions in the environment that require teleological principles that govern other things as well?
I think that's right, yeah. But I think that what Kant is aiming at here, and it becomes clear the further you go in the third critique, is that to consider us as natural beings, that's still to consider us as conditioned, right? And what he's really after is something unconditioned, such as us as moral agents, because that's where we're unconditioned. And he seems to be thinking that that's going to be the unconditioned that sort of is that conditions all of the empirical teleological laws in the world. That's the big picture as I see it.
Okay. Nancy?
Okay, two things. At 12:30, I'd like to have and Nancy asked me to have a few closing comments. But I don't understand, maybe everyone else does, but I don't understand about privileging the teleological over the mechanical. I don't know what that would consist in, or using mechanical laws, marshalling mechanical laws for teleological purposes. I just don't get any picture of what's going on and what God is. I don't understand what God's doing, and then I don't actually understand what the activity, what the thing itself is of using mechanical laws for teleological purposes or marshalling them. The picture I was left with, which was sort of getting the mechanical laws all to line up so they would serve teleological purposes, but I can't understand what that would be like. And I also then don't understand what God's doing in doing that. Maybe because I don't understand the picture to begin with, but it sort of looks like a very different kind of God than the whole story you told up till then.
Well, let me give this a shot and see if that helps. I mean, you might think of it on analogy with a kind of watchmaker example, right? The watchmaker has certain mechanical parts that operate according to mechanical laws, and then there's just this question, what does the watchmaker want to do? A clock, a watch, I mean, is it supposed to tell time accurately or moderately accurately? So there are certain ends or goals or purposes that the different mechanical parts and mechanical laws could contribute to. So you're stuck with those parts and laws, perhaps, but you're not stuck with, if you're God, you're not stuck with a particular purpose right away, and so you can use those mechanical parts and laws to promote various different ends. Now, of course, the end of a watch or a clock is going to be different from what he's envisioning for the natural world. And there, the sort of moral end is that one has to have in the world eventually the happiness proportionate to the
this
virtue.
sounds, maybe I can tell you what my puzzle is. It sounds, it just sounds like when I teach the mechanical philosophy, and we obviously do have not just mechanical regularities, but regularities about organisms. So it looks as if God, which in your story isn't the case, but if God laid down the mechanical laws, then there had to be a very clever St. Peter to put all the parts in the right places so that once the mechanical laws were playing themselves out, sort of epiphenomenally, these other regularities emerged, or or getting the moral order right emerged, and that sounds terribly un-Kantian to me. This story that I always tell about the mechanical philosophy.
What about adopting a different conception of what Kant's up to? How's that as a possibility? And I concede that in some ways, not all Kantians are going to be happy with this story I've told. There's kind of remarkable agreement amongst some of the Kantians here, but one shouldn't let our general consensus lead one to think that all Kantians think this way. So.
Okay, thank you.
There was a hand in the back on the far side. Yes.
Thanks, Eric. Great paper, very clear. So this addresses a question that I've had for a long time about Kant, actually, and it's the relation between the three gods that you've outlined for us. We have the natural, the moral, and the transcendental. Now, so let's say, so these are all ideas, and so they're a species of concepts, but they're concepts that we can never get an object, an experience of. Now let's say that I have the belief that there's a red thing, and there's a wooden thing, and there's a square thing. That doesn't entail that there is a thing that's red and wooden and square. So why does Kant think that all three of these ideas all pick out one individual object?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a difficult issue that I think that was in the step where it went from you need a ground of possibilities to that being a single ground. And why that has, why it has to be a single thing. That's not so obvious either in the text or philosophically. I mean, it is a kind of, so two extreme options, right, is that you could have, for every possibility, an actual thing grounding it. Or you could have for all possibilities, one thing grounding it. I mean, logically, both of those are possible. It seems more economical, at least, to go with the one ground for all the possibilities rather than the other way around. Are there objective reasons that it has to be that way? No. But our reason finds it more satisfying to think that there would be one ground for all the possibilities. That's about as far as I'm willing to try to defend the argument.
Well, that comment seems to only get at the one idea of God, the real possibility ground.
Right.
But then there's still the question of three going together. I mean, so you suggested in your talk that we can only make sense of the moral order on the presupposition of there being the metaphysical ground of possibility, but that just says that the one thing presupposes the other, and again, not that they're identical.
Right. I'd want to appeal to the same kind of, you could have three different grounds performing these three different functions, or you could have one that does all three. Reason is more satisfied with that option than the other. I mean, what the project would entail is having a clear and detailed account of the nature of reason. And Kant has specific views on that, right, which depart from, I take it, at least some of the main standard options in the contemporary scene. So I'm not suggesting that this is trivial and obvious. But on the other hand, I mean, there is, I have to confess that I find, at least sometimes quite attractive, his sort of metaphilosophical characterization of the kinds of activities that we perform and the kinds of things that we would concede as a kind of resting place, versus other options. I'm not sure they have that kind, I'm not sure that they have features that can provide that kind of account. So.
Okay, we have Andrew, and I'll have to call you Mr. Yellow Shirt, and then I'd save a little time for Nancy to make some. I can do that at 12:30. Oh, all right. Well. 5 minutes is our lunch. All right. Andrew? Margaret. Yes.
Do you mind if I speak? Are you pointing to me?
Yes, go ahead.
Nancy? Right. I tend to wave my finger and not be able to attract attention very much. But first of all, Eric, thank you very much for a very moving and inspiring paper, particularly as I haven't been a great Kant admirer. And it's been enormously informative and helpful in the discussions we've had here on Kant. So first of all, to say that. Secondly, then, having been rather impressed by all of this, I'm wondering if I can help